You're very welcome joining us again from St. Eugene's Cathedral Hall in the wonderful city and diocese of Derry. We've been journeying with the great Gospels of the Lenten Sundays. The first Sunday was the temptations of Jesus in the desert to be unfaithful to the mission that he had. Then there was the Transfiguration last Sunday, helping the apostles to be prepared for the awful events of Holy Week and Good Friday. So now we're really into the meat of the journey. The great gospel for the third Sunday of Lent is the story of Jesus in St. John's Gospel, chapter 4, meeting a woman at a well in Samaria. Today I have for this conversation Holly Frystal. Holly is from Strabane, from the parish of Melmont. She's currently studying in Maynooth, doing a degree in theology with Latin.
Theology, history, and Latin.
Theology, there you are. These are what young people are doing nowadays. We're part of her. A lady with a wonderful sense of adventure and strength of character. And I want to explore some of the aspects of this encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, just to put everyone in the picture, to be clear. The Samaritans, as you know, were seen as a distinct people from the Jews. There was a certain shunning of the Samaritans because they had different religious practices. This woman comes to the well at the middle of the day. It turns out she's married 5 times. It's assumed that she came to the well in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day, in order to avoid the scorn of many of those people with whom she lived. So she was excluded in her own community, and she lived in a community that seemed excluded from the mainstream Jewish community. So I'd just like to look at that whole idea of woman in faith journeying, to look at the question of those who feel excluded, to look at how Jesus engages with this woman and brings her from the position where she feels so excluded by everyone and looked down upon by everyone, to a person who runs back to her community and says, I have found the Messiah, come on, suddenly feeling included. So, Holly, that's a rich story about a woman at the well. Jesus' disciples have gone off and left him, and she's there, and he asks her for a drink. Have you any experience of or comments on the whole question of those who feel excluded in society? I know there's been some question about homelessness recently that you heard about.
Yeah, well, we had Father Peter McVerry yesterday for the John Paul ceremony, and he spoke of how, I thought it was interesting how he spoke of the root, the problem of homelessness. Like, he didn't speak about, just homeless people seek a pillow for their head and something to eat or drink, but there seems to be a massive mental health crisis behind it all. And he was speaking about how, people hunger for life rather than, just like a bed or something to eat. And I was interested in how he spoke about how we need to move away from those 2 words, I want, to you need. So that was one witness, I suppose, that I've heard recently. Another thing, we had our synodal conversations in Maynooth, and lately we were speaking about this topic actually, the marginalised and those in the periphery. And there was a fella that was speaking about his time before really consciously making that decision to follow Christ. And I didn't know before, and I mean I've been friends with him now for about 6 or 7 months, and I didn't know that he was a member of the LGBTQ+ before he came to Maynooth. And he spoke, when he spoke of this, like he called it conversion from what he was, I suppose, or how he felt to be consciously becoming a practicing Catholic or Christian. And there was a pain in his voice, I thought I heard, although he's trying to push it down and think, oh well, I'm on the right track now. But something didn't sit well with me, because he's pushing away what he is. If that's about who he is, then that's, I think there's still something not right there, I thought. Yeah. And then, so that was another witness. And I suppose that I've focused a lot, especially in the net, and with our exhibition project in Camus.
That's the diocesan newspaper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a relationship between the young and old, that intergenerational aspect, and I think that there's definitely a disconnection between them. But through the witness of the Camus project, it's proven that the young and old can make an excellent team.
Very good. So there's a whole range of alienations going on in society. You mentioned those who, for whatever reason, feel outside, they haven't achieved, or they're homeless, or they've served a term in prison, or they feel themselves labelled for life and find it hard to love themselves. Those who, the whole question of sexual orientation and how you live that out, and struggling to be a follower of Christ and be true to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a lot of alienation by many people in a society which feels we live in age groups where we don't need one another or can't learn from one another, and where it's wonderful to be young and good looking and fit and everything going for you, and then once you get into the stage of having to take responsibility, life becomes really rather miserable and hardly worth living.
Yeah. So no, that's they're the kind of the recent witnesses anyway I've encountered. Yeah.
It's striking to how Jesus engages with this woman, whom he will know to be somebody excluded among the excluded. He doesn't lecture her. He asks her for a favour. He says, "Can you give me something to drink?" And of course she's horrified. What? You, a Jew, asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink? Because the Jews would not have even supped from the same container as an unclean Samaritan would have, particularly if it was a female. I'm just wondering, have you any ideas, or have you come across examples of how Christ is alive, for example, as a document that you've been very good at studying with others in your book club? How Pope Francis talks about engaging with people who may seem very far away. I think friendship's important.
Yeah, you would say often that a big part of believing is that sense of belonging, and I think that it is a difficult one, how we can try and, I suppose, administer to those who are not at the table. But I suppose it's going to the places where they're at, meet them where they're at. I suppose I don't think, like God, I'm not too sure actually. But
well, I mean, I think you're at a secular university, and there would be an awful lot of negativity towards Catholicism specifically, and religion in general. It can't be easy for you, along with your peers, to engage on questions of faith. Would that be true?
It's interesting, like, because I think in South Campus, in St Patrick's, there would be a lot of faith-based conversations, but on the North Campus, it would be very secular, it would be very diverse. But I've actually noticed, I don't know, I hope I'm not going off topic, but in North Campus, not North Campus, sorry, no, way down south, there's still a very conservative view, especially amongst youth. And I remember in Christus Vivit, I was reading Pope Francis says about our influences and the people that guide us and bring us up, that he says young people, like, don't be robbed of your future or hope. And I think a lot of young people might have received maybe a very old-fashioned influence, that in our conversations there seems like quite an unhealthiness, maybe, I think.
Yes, they need to hear more good news. Jesus talks about a fountain of water welling up within you to eternal life. What sort of things deep down in conversations do you think many of your peers actually are longing for? What are they thirsting for? You're told, have a good weekend, have a wild party, that's the best you can expect. But I mean, I imagine deep down many young people are thirsting for something else as well as that.
I suppose I'm fortunate that I'm here where I am. I mean, I feel okay, like, but I think what they're longing for is, again, that sense of belonging. And I think you always hear young people's voices, especially when there's an injustice. And I see with, Ukraine and all, and the crises like the pandemic and stuff, the world's united. And it's always in crises that is evident. But I think what they're hungering for is just to be included. Like I was mentioning, all those like kind of groups on the margins. For example, I think that if somebody's told that you don't fit the bill, or you're not God, God's ideal person, then I think that must hurt, must really, really hurt. So I think if we can try through our actions, faith action comes along with faith. I think that St. Francis once said, "Preach always, sometimes use words." So I think that if we were to show God's love via our actions, I think that in some way or another, I think it's just in everyday life, it could make a difference.
Not getting engaged in angry debates,
Yeah.
but actually treating anger or aggression with, which I presume this woman in the gospel, the Samaritan woman, was used to respond with kindness and gentleness,
Yeah.
is maybe part of the witness.
Yeah, I think maybe not actually, I don't know whether maybe sitting down having a debate about it, maybe that's not just the way. I think what follows afterwards, I think we just kind of have to kind of put it into our everyday lives. And it's funny, Father Peter McVerry said yesterday about anger, it just depends on what way you use it.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, interestingly, over this past couple of years, there's been a huge emphasis, the Greta Thunberg emphasis on the climate, and there is no planet B, that very catchy phrase that I like. And young people are idealistic in very many ways. And the whole environmental issue has given people a place to belong, somewhere where they feel something they can be passionate about.
Yeah. I suppose, like maybe I was saying about, moments of crisis, I think when we find that common ground, there's things, like I suppose the environment is something that we all have in common, so we'll all agree on it. We want to protect that common home so that there's for future generations and stuff like that. But I wouldn't know too much now about ecology.
Yes, but I'm just thinking of the phenomenon of young people
Yeah.
wanting to be together and finding something round which they can gather.
Yeah, yeah.
And where they can feel an idealism. I mean, I was a teenager a long time ago in the 60s, but it was social justice and votes for all and all of those things that were on the cards when I was a teenager. And you thought, everything is so clear, why doesn't everybody else see it the same way as we do? But I think young people are always idealistic. The strange thing is, there's a strong idealism, it seems to me, for the environment and not being wasteful, and yet a huge commercial pressure to buy, to use, to consume. Don't cook, just eat.
Well, definitely we live in that kind of culture now that as Father Peter was saying, that I want culture. And I think that you were speaking of a lady yesterday, how she was happy where she was, and all the things that she thought would make her happy, now she's give them up.
Yeah.
So I suppose maybe young people are, what's that word, delusioned or something? There's maybe
disillusioned.
Disillusioned, and maybe think
Yeah.
that this is the whole package. But obviously it's just temporarily, and it's nothing. It doesn't. It's funny how it doesn't satisfy them. And Father Peter was saying yesterday all about, I want starts with, you're never satisfied. You keep wanting everything. So I think that it's just, we're kind of in that culture, yeah.
There's an author who lives in the diocese here who's very much involved in church, Sean O'Connell, who has a novel about young people, but he invented a phrase called copy wanting, which seems to be able to synthesize part of what our culture is about. You're supposed to want something because somebody else has it, not because you really want it, but you simply want to copy somebody else and not feel left out. And I have the impression that certainly the commercial world, advertising, is very strong to say, you don't belong unless you have X, Y, and Z, or do A, B, and C. And there's a huge pressure, because the youth market is very much a market that's under pressure to spend the money that they do have.
Yeah, what was it, copy wanting? What is this?
Copy wanting.
Copy wanting. It's like just synonymous with trend, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's just trying to, it's everywhere you go. I mean, I think people, it has to have a brand on it. And then I suppose it's the whole idea again of that sense of belonging and fitting in. That's why people, I think, buy these things and stuff. But no, I don't know how. I mean, I suppose if you take Loch Derg, we were talking about the last pilgrimage we went on. They were asking how we can bring youth back to Loch Derg. And I was thinking about it last night, how every generation well, I would say nearly every generation, the youth of that generation came to Lough, but why not mine? Why is mine not going?
Yeah.
And there's no, we couldn't just be the ones standing out. We couldn't be like that different from any other youth in the past. So I think it is that consumerist society or that culture that is built up, and it's going to be very difficult, I think, to strip all that back.
Yes, there's an enormous sort of wallpaper of pressure to conform to certain standards, just as there was in Samaria as well in Jesus' time and in the Jewish population. I think there's always been huge social pressure to conform, and yet Jesus seems to be able to cross the barrier there. Which all brings me to the whole question of this is a woman who was particularly looked down upon, and the whole question of women and faith is very sort of relevant nowadays. I suppose a few generations ago there were roles for women in running hospitals and running schools in the church, for religious sisters who were in many cases mighty women who did enormous things here and on the missions. And I have a sense that we simply don't have an appreciation of or a role for women. And you're a young woman, second year at university, studying theology. How do you come to that whole question of the role of women and faith and Jesus and church and all of that?
It's actually a massive topic in my head these past couple of years. And it's funny, I remember saying years ago, around 10 or 11 years old, I probably consciously said that yes and following my faith. It's always been there, but 10 or 11 I was taking that interest that bit further. And I might have been off that kind of old-fashioned view, thinking, oh well, just the church as it is now, I'm happy with that. But now, these past couple of years, when I've started making choices, I'm like, oh, I would want to do that, but I can't do that. And it's, I think we were talking in our synodal conversations too, that the church is the people of God, not the bricks and mortar. And the people of God's purpose is to make disciples of all nations. And I think I feel limited in what I can do in the church. But in saying that, we were looking in theology at the minute about the early Irish church. And I love that example of that representation of the early church, because it was a co-responsible one, I think, as Pope Francis speaks of, and that whole idea of journeying near and far, young and old, men and women. So yeah, I think that's...
Yes, it was very much a missionary church, the early Celtic church. The monastic life, living in community, tough disciplines, were all to prepare them not for retreating from the world, but to prepare them to go out. The Irish missionaries were the ones who, after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 6th and 7th centuries, since Ireland hadn't been under Roman rule, there was a real flourishing of Irish monasticism, who went to re-evangelize Europe. But the focus is all on the church on mission, rather than the church as a structure with power and so on. And it was there were lots of men and women involved in that. In the early Irish church, you were saying. Yeah,
it's like we were looking at, I think I did an article in the Net in February. I think it was Coleman, what were their names now? It was Coleman, Bridget, Finman, I think. And Gobnet.
Yes,
I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. But it's that was, I'd done kind of like an analysis on it. I'd seen how that word that Pope Francis uses, co-responsibility. But no, definitely, I think it's just we kind of have moved away from that sense of community to that hierarchy kind of structure. But I suppose to the Synod, we're trying to kind of fix that again now.
Yes, as I say, with moving away just from the church as an organisation to the church as a tool used by the Lord to bring good news to the world, and inside the church to model good news in order to inspire people by the way we live. And that certainly isn't the reputation that we have at the present time. I think Pope Francis said too about synodality that it involves conversion on the part of everybody. If people come along thinking, this is the solution, do this and everything will be all right, they're not prepared to enter into a synodal journey. They just want their voice to be heard. And I think Pope Francis says that there has to be conversion by everybody to discover what the Holy Spirit is asking of the church, rather than a parliamentary approach where somebody thinks if they shout loud enough and long enough they'll get what they want.
No, I think we're very impatient people nowadays, and I think No, you're right. Like, I mean, I think we're just, sure what we said. Oh, what was that again?
No, just say the whole idea of focusing on becoming a missionary church rather than just how do we run the institution.
Yeah.
It has to be an institution that is fit for mission, that will model good practice, that will inspire people by how we live our lives.
Yeah. I just think that, I think, I'm not too sure.
Okay, I think one question too strikes me about the Samaritan woman, that Jesus talks about, well, she goes back and says, he told me everything I ever did. She seems to be able to move from somebody who was burdened by her past.
Yeah.
You know, feeling guilty and made to feel guilty about her past and things that had happened to her or things she had done, to being somebody who was able to say, you know, yeah, that is my past, and I have a future as well as a past. I have the impression there's a lot of forgiveness to be done in our society.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to move on when you remember your past. I think I've always heard once you go to confessions, God forgets afterwards, but we don't. And I think it's very difficult, I suppose, for people to move away from that. That's what it was in my head a wee minute ago. You're right in saying about how we have to take part in this journey. Like, we don't have, I think we're wild for looking for answers and stuff. But I remember when we were on our call in Kilwalk, I think it was Jim says to me, he says that we're always like anxious to get from A to B, and we never enjoy the journey in between. So I think it always stuck with me, so it did since then. So I think that, you know, I think it's the whole idea of getting everyone on the one boat, and we had to discern together so everyone can probably agree together maybe.
So it's belonging, it's having time to journey together and to let the Lord lead us, and to journey with a confidence that God is leading us, even if we're not sure what direction we're going in. And I suppose those Irish saints that you talked about all experienced that setting off into the unknown, trusting that they would be led.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's a good image to just pull us together for our Lenten journey. We want to get to Easter and so on, and get then beyond Easter to the summer, and yet Jesus says, take time with Lent, take time with the Samaritan woman, allow her story to enrich your telling and your retelling of your own story. Allow that fount of water to well up inside you, to tap into the freshness that is there, rather than being burdened with what you think is all the negativity that we get from so many sources. Because you will need that. You're the minority. You're the tiny minority. You're a young Catholic woman studying theology. In many ways, you'll be the persecuted outsider at some stage. You'll be the heretic among your contemporaries. And yet Jesus says, no, I'm with you on this journey. I'm going to walk with you. We are going to tap into great resources and build relationships where other people thought there could be no possible relationship.
Yeah, I think that you were touching there on forgiveness as well. I mean, I was at Mass there, was it yesterday, and the priest was speaking about it. He says, there's no excuses. He says, get back up on the horse. He says, if you fall back, you fall off it. Which is something I need to hear, I says, because, like, I mean, things that I went off for Lent, like, I probably broke a couple of them, but I need to try and start again, like. So I think it's, no, definitely. I think there's lots of wounds in the past, I think, needs healed before we go forward at all.
Well, at least to acknowledge those can be liberating, rather than pretending they're not there or thinking a sticking plaster will cover them. Jesus takes time with this woman to be at peace with her own story. Okay, Holly, I think we're getting towards the end of our time here. Thank you very much as a young 20-year-old. 19-year-old Catholic woman studying theology and Latin and history, and having a passion for the gospel and passion for sharing the gospel. I hope some other young people can read this chapter 4 of St. John's Gospel and let it knit in with their own story to see where Jesus might be leading them, because I think, as you say, young people are still full of idealism, and society in many ways doesn't offer them many outlets for idealism. And there are still small numbers saying, I want to dedicate my life to Christ, I want to dive into the well and be nourished by it. But I hope this conversation with Holly here has enabled us to all reflect a little bit, and to pray about that encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Chapter 4, St. John's Gospel, the great Gospel of the third Sunday in Lent, in the Cycle A, of the readings. I hope you can enjoy the reading. Read it plenty of times. See what phrases touch your heart in terms of being in touch with your story, being at peace with where you are, believing that healing is possible, and looking for that wellspring that can well up to eternal life from deep down inside yourself when Jesus points you to it. Thank you for journeying with us. Holly, thank you for being with me for this conversation. And please God will meet you again next week for our reflection on the Gospel of the fourth Sunday in Lent with another young person in this wonderful diocese of Derry. God bless you.